One of the most painful moments after leaving a narcissistic relationship is seeing them move on so quickly. Sometimes it happens within weeks, sometimes within days. Sometimes it feels like it happens before the relationship even ends. And when you see that, it can create a devastating question inside your mind. Did any of it mean anything to them? Were the memories real? Was the connection real? Or were you simply replaceable? But here's the part most people don't understand. The speed at which narcissists move on is not about love. It's about something completely different. And understanding that difference can completely change the way you see what happened. If you've experienced this, you probably remember the shock, the moment you discovered they were already seeing someone else. Maybe through social media, maybe through friends, maybe through a photo that appeared unexpectedly. And suddenly, there they were, smiling, laughing, looking happy, with someone new. And in that moment, something inside you breaks again. Because while they seem to be moving forward, you're still processing the emotional wreckage of the relationship, the confusion, the manipulation, the unanswered questions. And this contrast can feel incredibly painful. You're grieving, reflecting, trying to understand what happened, while they appear to be living as if nothing ever mattered. But here's something important. The speed at which narcissists replace partners is rarely about emotional recovery. It's about psychological supply. And once you understand what narcissistic supply really is, you begin to understand why they move on so quickly. But there's an even deeper layer to this behavior, a layer many survivors don't realize until much later. And it explains why their new relationships often follow the exact same pattern. Narcissistic relationships are built around a specific emotional structure, not mutual connection, not emotional intimacy, but validation, attention, admiration. These things form what psychologists often call narcissistic supply, and supply becomes the emotional fuel that stabilizes their sense of self. Without it, they often feel empty, unstable, restless. So when a relationship ends, they aren't just losing a partner, they're losing a source of emotional regulation. And that loss can feel extremely uncomfortable. Not necessarily because they miss the person, but because they miss the function the person served. And this is where the rapid replacement often begins. When healthy relationships end, people go through a grieving process. Reflection, emotional processing, learning. But narcissistic dynamics often bypass that stage. Instead of processing the loss, they replace the source of supply quickly, sometimes urgently. Because the goal is not emotional healing. The goal is restoring the emotional structure that once supported them. And this is why the new relationship often appears so suddenly. But here's the deeper truth. Speed is not the same thing as emotional depth. Here's the part most people don't understand. The new relationship may look exciting, passionate, perfect, especially online. But in many cases, the same cycle is already beginning because narcissistic patterns rarely change without deep self-awareness. And that self-awareness is often absent. So the dynamic repeats, idealization, intensity, attachment, and eventually the same emotional instability. But for the survivor watching from the outside, it can still feel devastating. You might remember scrolling through their social media late at night, seeing pictures, reading comments, trying to understand how everything changed so fast. You may have asked yourself questions like, how could they replace me so easily? Was I ever important? Why am I still hurting while they look happy? These questions are incredibly common among survivors, and they reveal something important. You are experiencing the relationship as something real, something meaningful, something emotionally significant. But the narcissistic dynamic often operates under a different emotional structure. And this is why it hurts so much. Because you are not just grieving the person. You are grieving the future you believed in, the plans, the dreams, the version of the relationship you hoped would eventually exist. But narcissistic relationships often survive on potential. The promise of what things could become, not the stability of what they actually are, because potential can be incredibly powerful. In fact, it is often one of the strongest emotional hooks in narcissistic relationships. You don't stay only because of what the relationship is. You stay because of what it could become. Because in the beginning, there were moments that felt incredibly real. Moments where they seemed attentive, connected, understanding. And those moments create something very powerful inside the mind. Hope. Hope that the version of them you saw early on is a real version. Hope that the distance, the coldness, the confusion are just temporary phases. But here's the difficult truth many survivors eventually discover. Those early moments were often part of a psychological pattern called idealization. During the idealization phase, the narcissist mirrors what you value, what you believe in, what you dream about. It creates the feeling of deep compatibility. Almost like you've met someone who finally understands you. And this is why the connection can feel so intense in the beginning. But idealization is not the same thing as emotional intimacy. It's emotional positioning, a way of creating rapid attachment. And once attachment forms, the dynamic slowly changes. Not suddenly, gradually. Small moments of criticism appear. Small moments of emotional withdrawal appear. Confusion begins entering the relationship. And when that confusion appears, many survivors begin trying harder. Trying to repair the connection. Trying to bring back the version of the relationship that once felt magical. But this is where the cycle deepens. Because the more emotional effort you invest, the stronger the attachment becomes. And when the relationship eventually ends, that attachment does not disappear overnight. It lingers, sometimes for months, sometimes longer, which is why seeing them move on so quickly can feel so painful. Because you are still emotionally processing something that felt incredibly real, while they appear to be recreating the same dynamic somewhere else. But here is something important many survivors eventually realize. The new relationship is not necessarily a fresh start. It is often a reset of the same cycle, the same pattern, the same structure, just with a different person inside the role. And understanding this can slowly change the way you interpret what happened. You begin realizing something powerful. You are not easily replaceable. You are simply part of a pattern that repeats itself. And patterns don't change just because the person inside them changes. They only change when the structure changes. And that kind of change requires something very rare. Self-awareness, accountability, emotional responsibility. Things that narcissistic personalities often struggle to sustain. So while it may look like they moved on effortlessly, the deeper reality is often much more complicated. Because wherever they go, the same internal dynamics go with them. Take a moment and ask yourself something honestly. Were the best moments in the relationship often at the beginning? Did things feel magical early on, almost perfect? And then slowly, things began changing. Distance appeared, confusion appeared, emotional instability appeared. For many survivors, the answer is yes. And that realization can be painful, but it can also be incredibly freeing. And because when you understand the psychological structure of the relationship, something inside you begins shifting. You stop measuring your worth against their behavior. You stop asking why they replaced you, and you begin asking a different question. Why was the relationship structured around emotional instability in the first place? That question changes everything, and once clarity begins replacing confusion, healing becomes possible, slowly, step by step. You begin rebuilding your sense of identity, your emotional boundaries, your understanding of healthy connection. You stop chasing validation from someone who could never truly provide it, and you begin rediscovering something much more powerful: your own emotional stability, your own voice, your own worth. And that is where the real recovery begins. If you're watching this while still hurting, please remember something important. Their ability to move on quickly does not define your value. It reveals the structure of the dynamic you escaped. Healing takes time. Processing takes time. Growth takes time. And the fact that you are reflecting on what happened means you are already moving forward in a deeper way. One that leads to clarity, freedom, and eventually, peace. If this video helped you understand something about your experience, consider subscribing. This channel exists to help you understand narcissistic relationships and to help you heal and move forward. You survived the relationship. Here, we help you survive it too. And if you've ever wondered why narcissists sometimes come back months later, the next video on this channel explains exactly why narcissists return after the discard.